Okay, now I'm just going to draw mine on a separate sheet of paper because I really didn't give you a lot of room there. So I drew a number line from 1 to 10 because my max is 10. I'm going to go to my minimum, which is 4, and I'm going to put a point at 4. My maximum is at 10. My median is at 7. My quartile 1 is at 5.5, so I'm going to go to 5.5. And quartile, I said my median is at 7. My quartile 1 is at 5.5. And my quartile 3 is at 8.5. So I'm going to go right here. This is going to give me, the 3 medians will make a box. The max and the min will make the whiskers. Okay, so there's your box and whisker plot. Now, we need to talk about the measure of variation. That's a value that describes the spread of the data set. The most commonly used measures of variation are the range, the interquartile range, and remember that the interquartile range is right here. So if you're asked to find that, it's the box and whiskers from here to here. We don't need that extra range there. The variance, the standard deviation, and this is what we're going to be talking about right now, the variance and the standard deviation. So the variance is the average of the squared differences from the mean, and its symbol looks like this. This is a sigma, and it's squared. This is a Greek symbol. The standard deviation, we use the variance to find the standard deviation. That's why I talked about that first. Standard deviation is one of the most common and useful measures of variation. The symbol used for standard deviation is sigma. It's the lowercase Greek letter. So notice that the variance is sigma squared. So that means once we find the variance, in order to get the standard deviation, all we need to do is take the square root. Now, low standard deviations indicate the data are clustered near the central tendency. So, for instance, if I have data that, let's say I have this is my mean at maybe 10, and I have my other data might be 11, 12, 9, 8. This would have a low standard deviation, but if I have, because there is a small difference between each of these values, but if I have, let's say 10 and I have 49, 103, and then maybe 2 and 0 over here, this would have a high standard deviation. Think of deviating from the mean. Lots of distance from the mean here, small distance from the mean here, so the standard deviation is low. If you have a high standard deviation, that indicates that the data is spread out from the center. Okay, so here are the steps, and I just kind of wrote off to the side here. Here's an example of a low standard deviation. Here's an example of a higher standard deviation. So here are the steps for finding standard deviation, and standard deviation is used in a lot of things, sciences, psychology. So we're going to use the data set 7, 4, 3, 9, and 2, and we're going to just do the steps to find the standard deviation. Okay, so step number 1 says that we need to find the mean. Now this is a symbol for mean. So we're going to add all the values up and divide by the number in the data set. And there are 5 of them in the data set. So that's going to be 5. So that's step 1. Step number 2 says find the difference between the mean and each data value and square it. Okay, so that's what we're going to do for I'm going to do step number 2 and 3 together. Okay, so step number 2, take each piece of data. So I take the 7, I subtract 5 and square it. I take the 4, subtract 5 and square it. I take the 3, subtract 5 and square it. 9, subtract 5 and square it. 2, subtract 5 and square it. Okay, so like I said, I'm going to do these 2 steps together. Then it says to find the variance, I have to add all of the squares that I just did, and so I did that at the same time, so I didn't have to square them and then add them together. And then I'm going to find the average. So there are 5 of them, which means I need to divide by 5. Okay, so this is step 2 and 3 together. First you find the average, you use the average, You go back to each data set and you find out how far away it is from the average, each piece of data. Find out how far it is away from the average. You square it, and then you find the average of that. That's going to be your variance. So here, our variance ends up being 6.8. The next step is you take the square root of the variance. So you find the standard deviation by taking the square root of the variance. So we take the square root of that, and I have my standard deviation of 2.6. And we'll talk about how you use that after the video.